Welcome to Evolve to Succeed, the podcast that brings together entrepreneurs, founders, business leaders and experts to talk about their journeys and explore the link between personal and business success. I'm your host, Warren Munson, founder of Evolve, a coaching, training and development company focused on enabling business and personal success and creating a community of like-minded individuals. Whether that be through our peer groups, one-to-one coaching, our training and development programs for you and your teams, or through our content and events, our mission is to get the best out of each individual and inspire them to be better both in life and in business. If you want to learn more about Evolve, including our beautiful co-working space in Ashley Cross in Poole, then please go to evolvemembers.com, where you'll find great content, insights, details of all of our services, and also information on our forthcoming events. For now though, let's get on with the show. Welcome to the second half of our countdown of our top 10 episodes and podcasts of 2022. Last week we heard from Joe Coleman of Summerdown Farm, Ben Ashton of Good Oats Home Care, serial entrepreneur Ty Temmel, Darren Mooney of Global Brand Communications, and Chloe Adams of The Art Movement. So without further delay, let's begin the countdown of our top 5. We start with Dave Chedgy, who went from Premiership rugby player to city trader and then co-founder of boutique personal training studio Dynamic Health in Lilliput. There were so many questions I wanted to ask Dave, such as what was his transition from sportsman to trader like? What was his experience of 24 years in the city? What ignited that personal and professional shift that saw him abandon his career as a trader and move back to his roots on the South Coast? And what is it like running a business with your spouse? Perhaps you should start with those 24 years in the city and what that taught you about yourself and who you are, and those experiences from a, I suppose, positive and a negative perspective.
There's certainly plenty of those. I had, from the very start, I had no real connection with the city, which is quite unusual because a lot of people tend to have either parents working there or have been to the right school. The natural evolution is to then go into city type work.
Do you think that's still the same these days? Do you think
less and less so. So certainly towards the end, well, certainly the last 10 years, whereas before you would have probably found your sort of market trader, second-hand car salesman type Del Boy, as you would picture in the city.
Yeah.
It's definitely since, probably for the last 15, 20 years, it's become much more maths orientated.
Right.
I think where the underlying financial instruments are becoming more and more complex, in order to be perceived or to actually understand the underlying risks, you have to, in theory, know a lot of the maths behind it. So therefore, it's moved away from your second-hand cars salesman to like the average graduate now is probably a undergraduate at Oxford in maths. They'll do a economics and maths at Harvard, PhD, and then come into the city. So it's definitely coming much more from a cerebral perspective. The reason I went into the city is, as I said, I wanted to avoid just the long. I didn't want it scared me, a big long career in front of me where, you know, I didn't want to work that hard for that long period of time. The idea of a job where I could go in and earn a lot of money, work really intensely, hard work didn't scare me, but hard work over 40 or 50 years I just couldn't get my head around. So I wanted something where I could go in and hopefully work hard and get rewarded quickly for it.
Which is great, but 24 years in the city is quite unusual in itself as well, isn't it, these days? There's that kind of burnout piece. Maybe this...
It's certainly like, you know, and it definitely, stress towards the end was definitely, I could feel it on my body. It was taking its toll. As you can see, these grey hairs, they
At least you have hair.
I wasn't going to comment, but 7 or 8 years ago I didn't have these. But I think it's an accumulation of stress and pressure. You can take it in your 20s and 30s. Then as soon as you get to that point when you have kids, you're not sleeping as well. You're still expected to go out till 3 a.m, be at your desk at 6:30. there's a reason it's a young man's game, and for me also, it also just tied in with when a lot of the fun was leaving the job. A lot of the job roles were being de-risked. You weren't able to take on the same degrees of risk and positions that you used to be able to, and just the general fun of the job.
Yeah.
Like a lot of things in the last few years, it's been eked out of it. With rugby, I've certainly got a general feeling of, it feels like unfinished business, but unfortunately, at the age I am now, it's probably going to remain unfinished.
I think it's done.
Yeah, I think that horse is bolted, unfortunately. But no, I loved it. Got to play with some great players and against some great players. Loved every moment of it. Learned a lot from it, which I probably, some of that was almost on the negative side that I've taken forward into my career in the city and leaving. Yeah. But yeah, no. For me, rugby's the best sport in the world. It's just what you learn from it in terms of life skills, working in a team, all that type of thing. Which is, when I last left the city, they were particularly going after Loughborough University because it's got a real sort of play hard, work hard, sporting background, and particularly sports people in general, just because of that sort of work hard, play hard ethic, which is very much what the city's all about.
Competitive spirit as well.
Exactly, it's that finding a way to win when it's not always obvious, and I think that's when you play sport at a high level. I was having a conversation with a guy the other day about this, in that I was playing tennis. I haven't played tennis for years, and reasonable tennis. I used to be a reasonable tennis player, but don't play a whole lot. But what I'm quite good at in most sports or things like that is finding a way to win, and you see it with the very top players. I was watching Wimbledon the other day, and you see someone like Nadal. Everything's against him, but he's always got that positivity that he's going to push through, and you feel like he's going to win. It's an edge, which I think, whether it's business, sport, or anything, most people who are reasonably successful, they get that edge. They'll and a lot of the time it's just plain belligerence. It's just refusing to lose and just keep going and going and going.
Determination and that sense of belief, and and like you say, finding the way, and it is that difference, isn't it? You look, in business, people that run anything from a small business to very large businesses, and when you look at those that succeed against their competitors of a similar size in a similar industry, it'll be those that are prepared just to go that extra 2-3%. Yeah, that makes a world of difference.
And just keep going sometimes, even when it's sometimes I think you're probably the good guys are probably the last person in the room to still remain positive and still think they can still get through it when everybody else is saying no. And again, whether it's sport or business, it's just being able to keep going relentlessly until you sometimes you shouldn't make it work, but you make it work.
Definitely. How does it feel running a business with your wife?
Yeah, it's a funny old one, isn't it? I'm
it's always an interesting dynamic.
It is. I think it works really well with us, partly because it's a relatively small studio. We can get sort of 10 to 12 people in, but because we work alongside each other rather than together. So there's a couple of classes where we run together, but most of it, either she's in the studio doing her thing or I'm doing mine. So it works. But I think particularly, one thing I'll say, working with your wife, you just got to realise that you're really there on a consultancy basis, and she's CEO. That's
the hint into it.
I would imagine that's probably pretty much the same for anybody.
Perfect.
Whatever size business.
Right, and it sounds like you've got complementary skills which work for your client base.
It does, yes. No, it seems to work, and I think that's part of our why we've probably done quite well. I think there's a few things on why we've done quite well over the last few years, which have been tough years. Is that part of the reason we set it up was in London, a lot of the gyms were going from, rather than being the big corporate gyms, to much sort of smaller, personal, bespoke type fitness companies, and that's the way it was going. I could see that was the way it was going, so that's what we wanted. We wanted to try and make essentially what feels like a private membership club, but without any fees. You're just paying for your use, rather than People are getting fed up with just paying their big direct debit, barely using the gym, and that was the way it was going. And I think particularly the fact it's husband and wife. It gives a bit of personality to the business.
Yeah, it must have that personality, that family kind of caring kind of feel.
That's certainly what we've tried to get across, and hopefully you'd have to ask the members rather than me. But I think most people would probably agree that we have quite a few sort of social functions and that type of thing, summer drinks, Christmas lunches, that type of stuff, and it has got that, hopefully, that family feel.
Next up, Richard North, co-founder and CEO of tech toy company Wow Stuff. As well as Wow Stuff, Richard has either founded or co-founded several companies over the years and appeared on an episode of The Secret Millionaire in 2010. I was alerted to Richard by a post of his I saw on LinkedIn, where he spoke about a car accident he'd had in 2001 that almost cost him his life. It was, of course, a moment that had a profound impact on Richard's outlook, and I was inspired by his retelling of how he battled through his post-accident injuries with tenacity and stoicism. I was therefore delighted to get him on the show a week or so after that very LinkedIn post to talk about the accident, his entrepreneurial drive, passion for the toy industry, and so much more.
You've heard that story where people say their lives flashed in front of them or everything slowed down. Well, it did slow down as the car spun, and it probably only spun for 4 or 5 seconds maximum before impacting into a lamppost side on. But it did feel like slow motion. And it sounds a bit crude, but the word that went through my mind as it happened was the F word. You know, I knew I was in a whole heap of trouble.
Something was going to come.
Yeah, something. Wherever it was going to end up, it wasn't going to look good. It wasn't going to be good. And so it spun, and I hit the lamppost side on. I had a soft top car, and the car just wrapped around that lamppost like a banana.
Wow.
And I remember that the impact was immense. I don't know whether I can remember hearing the bang, but more felt the bang. And the first thing I remember in those early seconds was looking down at my lap. The steering wheel, as I looked down, was almost in my lap, but so was the lamppost. So the lamppost was directly in front of me. My legs were broken clean through. They were still attached to my torso, but they were broken clean through and wrapped around the lamppost. And I could see the sole of my foot. Doesn't sound very nice. And extreme pain then followed.
Yeah. And then what effect did that then have on the business, on your life?
Well, as I sat there, I was lucky enough that a friend came along within a minute or two and contacted, said, look, I'll contact your wife, ambulance is on its way, and so on. And what flashed through my mind was, okay, I've lost my legs, and I suppose my positive spirit took over, and I've always been somebody who tries to look on the bright side of things if there was one in that at that moment. But just to keep me fighting, the positivity was, well, even if I lose my legs, I'll have a wheelchair and I can adapt it to hold a laptop, and I can therefore still work. I'll still have my wife, I still have my 2 kids. My wife was actually pregnant with our third, and 8 months pregnant at the time. So I was thinking of these kind of positive things. And the thing that I mentioned in my LinkedIn post was 10 more seconds. So as the pain became so extreme, I also became extremely tired. And the paramedics sat by me in the crumpled bits of the car. They couldn't cut me out. They were trying everything to try and get my body out. My legs were trapped in some metal. And they brought in a acetylene torch to cut my legs off because they didn't think they were going to be able to get me out alive, and it was a last-ditch effort. But a fireman, like out of a movie, a huge fireman, like a bodybuilder type, decided to have one last go. And I'm getting really tired. The paramedics, I heard her say, his heartbeats dropped to 18 beats a minute. He's going. He's only got a few seconds left. And I thought to myself, 10 more seconds. I'll hold on for 10 more seconds. So I actually didn't count down. I didn't count up to 10. I counted down from 10. So I would go in my mind, I'd say, stay awake, stay awake. That was in my mind. And I'd go 10, 9, 8, 7. And every time I got to 0, I'd think 10 more seconds. I can just last 10 more seconds before I fall asleep, which I guess, I believe that meant that would be it. So I'd count and count and count. And, 1 minute, 5 minutes, 20 minutes later, I'm still there. And then an hour and 20 minutes, they get me out, they put me in the ambulance, and they take me into the hospital where my life, really did change from that moment.
It's interesting in life and in your business journeys, generally, serendipity, meeting chance meetings, how they really impact on your life.
Yeah, Warren, that sums a lot of it all up. The serendipity, the chance meetings. Maybe you do make your own chances that are that thing we call serendipity. But you have to be out there. You have to have a positive outlook. You have to connect with people. And the more people you connect with, you don't see it necessarily at the time as there being anything more to it than a casual meeting, a drink with somebody, bumping into somebody at a business event. And then maybe a year or two goes by and you find you've got something in common, or they call you up and they say, oh, you're the guy in toys. I've met this other guy over here. He's got this interesting project, and so on. And these dots start to get linked up. And I would say that as I've got older, I've therefore got more and more contacts. And as I've got more and more contacts, I've been able to do more and more deals and achieve more things. And we live for innovation. We live for that moment when a kid gets one of our toys and the first thing they say when they look at it, play with it, interact with it, is wow. Because that takes me back to a time in my childhood that we've all had, haven't we? Where
absolutely,
you have a toy and it's Christmas Day. You've wanted maybe that toy. Sometimes you know what the toy's going to be. You're hoping, you don't know which box maybe it's going to be in with the wrapping, and you rip it apart. There it is. And you've just so prayed for it. You've dreamt about it, and you rip that packaging off, and it's there, and you just, wow. And that memory, and then playing with it and role-playing with it, can live with you, and often does. If it's that memorable a product, if it was that wanted at that time, it sticks with you forever, well into adulthood.
And becomes a fundamental memory, doesn't it?
Yeah, one of your really fun and fun, and everything about that memory is fun.
16 years in the industry. What keeps you hungry, passionate about wow stuff as a business and the industry?
First reaction has got to be finding the next big thing. The next big thing in toys. Okay. And actually, I think we've got a project that we're working on at the moment, and it's with technology. And it could be, we believe, not only will it be the next big thing in toys and collectibles, but we think it will be it's a horrible phrase sometimes because it's so overused, but a game changer in commerce. So we have a business that we call, or the start of a business we call the Immersiverse. So it's in the metaverse, and it's a project we've been working on actually for 10 years. It's our longest, the project that we've worked on off and on the longest of any other toy creation. In fact, probably all of the toy creations we've had combined. And we nearly did do a deal with a company called Hasbro, one of the major toy companies, with the CEO, president there. But God bless his soul, he passed away a couple of years ago, or a year ago, I should say. But it nearly came to life then. But we've now, all the rights are with us, and we will be bringing that out. So, it's living for the next big thing. Not living, it's the excitement, the drive, the energy comes from thinking, from believing that we will create that next big mega toy.
So we enter our top 3, and coming in at number 3 is Chris Croft, who is one of the UK's leading business trainers. Chris has been on the podcast before, and he actually took our number 1 spot in 2020. As well as being a regular contributor to the Evolve blog, Chris is a highly engaging individual with seemingly endless enthusiasm and opinions on just about any subject. I wanted to get Chris back on the show following an article he wrote entitled "Why Are So Many Bosses Bad?", which looked at several reasons why so many people don't like their bosses and addressed the serious issue of people getting promoted in positions of leadership with little or no training. As ever, our conversation between Chris and I was really candid. Why, in your opinion, are there so many bad bosses out there?
Yeah, I think it is difficult. It's not intuitively obvious how to be a boss. And most bosses don't have training in it.
I think that's a key factor.
Yeah, I mean, we know that the average British manager gets half a day a year of training, which is not very much. And loads of people get none at all. And most people just copy their bosses, which is not always a good idea. Yeah. I also think perhaps that the wrong type of people end up being bosses.
Yeah, sometimes those that shout the loudest, isn't it? And the biggest personality.
Yes, or the most horrible, aggressive, nasty person or tricky person who plays the politics ends up getting to the top. And, maybe nice people don't often get to be the boss. So there might be a selective process going on. But for whatever reason, my personal life survey has been that there are not many good ones out there. And I think that was a formative influence on me. And I think I've spent years now trying to sort of redress the balance and push back against bad bosses and trying to make at least some bosses become better ones. Yeah. And that's become a sort of almost a little crusade of mine without me realising. It was only when you asked me to do this I started thinking about it. I think it's quite easy to learn to be a good boss, actually. I don't think being a good boss is that difficult. And I think most people just don't even stop and think about it. They just think, my job's to turn up and solve problems, or my job is to turn up and make people work harder. And the way you do that is by shouting at people. Or that's what they think. Yeah. And they just sort of slip into that world of doing that without ever realising there's another way. Yeah. And so I think there are simple things that bosses can learn and do. I mean, a very quick example before we get into proper detail is thanking people. Like, some bosses never thank people. And I've done jobs where I was, for 2 or 3 years, I was never thanked. Now, I could have been utterly useless, of course.
There may be a reason for that.
I can't believe I was that bad. And even if I was, they should have found something half decent and praise that. If you look at dog training, you pick on the good thing the dog does, and you praise them, and you increase the amount of
more of that behaviour, don't you?
And people are just the same. People are absolutely the same in that respect. And so, why did a boss never thank me? And they say things like, "Well, I'm paying you. What more do you expect?" Or well, at least I haven't shouted at you, so you can't be that bad.
But thanking people is just being human, isn't it?
I know, and I've explained this to people on courses, and you could see them going, "Oh yeah, oh he's right." And so that's one simple thing that bosses can do that works, and it's free, and yet they often don't.
Do you think there's a difference between bad bosses in very large organisations or public sector organisations compared to the typical listener of this kind of podcast is that business owner entrepreneur?
Yes.
Do you think there's different traits?
Hugely.
Okay.
I think there are problems in both.
Yeah.
I don't know how much I'm allowed to say on this podcast. You can always edit it. But my belief is that the bigger the company, the worse it is.
Okay.
Generally. Yeah. And the last 25 years I've been doing training for all sizes of companies. The big companies are always much more inefficient. Okay. Loads of processes, silos, politics. Yeah. Getting a decision made is really difficult. It has to be signed off by loads of people. Big companies waste so much time and so much of people's energy and motivation in just stupid ways that they work. So, and it's not the fault of the people. It's just something to do with the system and the fact that if it's big, you just get more relationships
layers
and more
accountability.
Yeah.
I think that would happen. Yeah.
So big companies, I think the problem they have is sort of political bosses who, because if you think about it, would you take a risk if there was a chance of the company making more profit, but there's also a chance of you getting into trouble? And the answer is no, just keep your head down. So big organisations are full of people just playing the game and keeping their head down, and you can hide. Nobody will even notice.
And contrast that therefore, what you see in the
small
smaller
companies. They make decisions, they get on with things, they do things, it's great. I think the problem they sometimes have is that the boss can be unprofessional because they can be either a technical person who's had a brilliant idea, and it might be software, it might be a physical thing, or they might be a salesperson who's just been selling stuff but doesn't know about management. And if they own the company, they often don't want to spend money on, say, training because it's their own money. In a big company, you've got a budget. You've got to spend it. If you don't spend it, you lose it.
You don't get it.
Whereas a small company, you really feel the pain of the money. So quite often they won't invest.
So they'll underinvest.
Yeah, and so quite often they have a boss who, maybe is a bit macho or aggressive or short-term thinker or whatever. And I'm not saying all small companies like that at all. There's some brilliant small companies, but small companies, it's quite random who the boss is. Whereas when you get to a bigger company, it's more professional. They've thought more about it, and they've got systems, and they've stood the test of time as well. They must be doing something right. So I think small company bosses can be bad in other ways. So I think there are different types of bad boss out there.
Yeah, and it will depend on the organisation and I suppose industry and all of those kind of things. So what common complaints do you get typically about bosses when you're undertaking your management training? Because it must be a question you pose.
Well, the one word that jumps out at me immediately is communication.
Okay.
I sometimes do a thing called keep and change, where you say, what would you keep about this place, and what would you change about this place where we are, where you work? And they always say the first thing. They just say bad communication. And that's weird because communication's free. It's not that difficult. And I think some bosses are just not good communicators. But I think most bosses can do it really well if they want, but they just don't put the time aside for it. I mean, I think you probably should spend an hour a day just communicating. I mean, that's a huge cost.
It's a huge commitment, isn't it?
An hour a day, walking around talking to people, finding out what's going on, asking people, what they're working on, is everything okay? And then telling them what's happening in the company. And communication, it could be meetings, it could be one-to-one, but that's always the cry that I hear. We don't get told what's going on, and they don't listen.
And it is the one thing in any organisation that can always be improved, however good you are
at
it.
Yeah. And I remember when they first showed me Maslow's hierarchy, and that's just a theory.
Yeah.
And a bad training course, they just show you the theory and go, right, next.
Yeah.
But a good training course, they'll say, how does this apply to your real life? How can you make people feel more secure, or how can you make people feel more important?
Yeah.
And if you really discuss it and get into it, you can make it practical. So I think the key is to somehow get a link between the theory and the practice on the training course.
Okay.
Because otherwise people will go away and think, well, Maslow was interesting, but it's too hard to apply it. So I'll just go back to doing what I was doing before.
Yeah.
So you have to really help people make the link.
See the practical reality of the academic in the real world.
I mean, I've got a great example because I do on my negotiating course, I've got a story about a pine table and where I got loads of money off this pine table from this scary bloke in Bristol who'd stolen it. And so I tell this story, and it illustrates various things about opening offers and trading and things. And then quite often I get an email a month later from somebody saying, I've just got a real bargain on a bit of pine furniture. And I'm like, no, that was not a story about tables at all. It could have been anything.
Yeah.
But people just copy exactly what you tell them. And I think people find it really hard to make the link between the theory and then their jobs. So I think ideally you would make that link, or you'd help them make that link, because otherwise theory on its own is no good at all.
No.
And so I think something like an MBA, where you get a huge 3-year wodge of theory, is really undigestible. I mean, to actually apply that is really hard. I did an MBA, and I would say a third of it I already knew, because I wasn't that young when I did it.
Okay.
So the stuff on operations management I already knew.
Yeah.
A third of it I didn't understand.
That's a very honest answer, Chris.
But a third of it I have used.
Yeah.
So the bit about the marketing bit and the finance bit, I'm not an accountant, but I actually understand cash flow and profit and loss and all those things. And that was like, whoa, because for years I've never really understood those things. And so the MBA, it filled in a few random gaps. But the trouble is, I didn't know what the gaps were beforehand, or I perhaps wouldn't have admitted there were gaps. But the fact that we got everything, 1/3 of it wasn't wasted.
Yeah.
And it's perhaps a bit of an expensive way to fill in the gaps, but it did do that. So I think you have to have theory and practice. Theory on its own, you just can't digest. And practice on its own is too hard. And why reinvent the wheel? I mean, you're never going to reinvent management theory. People have been thinking about it for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And to just walk into a job where you're really busy and under stress and invent management theory, how are you ever going to do that? So you'd be mad not to have a little bit of training. I mean, I know
knowledge,
I would
training,
say that.
education, but put the practicality alongside. Our second most popular podcast of 2022 is Bernie's Shrosbree. Bernie is a world-class athlete and high-performance coach who has worked with an illustrious list of sports people, including Olympic gold medalists and racing drivers such as Jenson Button, Mark Webber and Colin McRae. From 16 years with the Royal Marine Special Boat Service to competing in a number of grueling sports events, including Arctic races, Bernie has more than 3 decades of experience at the highest level of competition and endurance. I was really eager to get him on the show to talk about the mindset required for top-level competition and how we can adapt those same traits to our personal and professional lives. As I discovered during the conversation, Bernie is someone who doesn't hold back on his opinions, and we had some great and honest discussions on a variety of different topics. And clearly, you absolutely can see the conviction in your eyes that experience, that military service, shaped you for the future.
Yeah, it's like this modern day. When I used to speak about it years ago, 20 years ago to people said to me, "Oh, why you sometimes you're not the fittest athlete, but you win. What is it?" And they say, "Oh, it's because you're mentally." And I'd say that it's what I learned to deal with in the services that that gave me that incredible. And it's about setting those standards for yourself. And I talk about this guy. That you can go onto YouTube. It's basically called About Making Your Bed. It's quite a tongue-in-cheek thing by William McRaven, and he's basically the admiral of the SEAL Team 6, the American SEALs, the Special Forces. And he's basically doing a conference to some these guys finishing in Texas, their university, and he's just saying to them, the key thing he ever learned in his life, goes back right to the beginning, of making his bed, and they're all laughing about it, and he's just saying, well, that principle of making my bed, because the title is it changed the world,
right? And
going back to making your bed is the first task of the day, and if you do those tasks, you get those small tasks right at the beginning of the day. The more difficult tasks, whether it's in business, sport, or life, if you get the other tasks right, then you'll basically see the benefits and see the progress, and you'll feel good about yourself personally. And as he said, if you have a really shit day and go, at least you've got a bed that's made.
It's clean, it's tidy, it's made.
Yeah.
And you talk about mindset a lot there already in this sort of short conversation we've had, Bernie. And do you really think that makes the difference between those that are good and those that are excellent?
Oh yeah, definitely. My life has been around. I've had the privilege, I suppose, to be around so many superior athletic people, and not just in sport, in other walks of life, in the military decisions, and it's kind of, it's the thought process that they've drilled or learned, the honesty, because that's what I said, it comes down to the honesty with themselves and thinking, no, I'm sticking to this is the decision I'm going to make. You've got to make that decision in a race, you've got to make that decision in a conflict of war, or it might be pure survival. I've got to get this right. We're in the mountains here. I've got to get it. I've got to get these decisions right. It's like this guy Nims that you read about. The guy, he's a friend of mine, and I saw all these stuff before it made the TV. And
remarkable man.
And it's incredible that he had to make that decision. It was very interesting speaking to him before he became super famous. I was just renting a place up the road here, and he just said, and I said, my God, when you rescued that Indian woman, who you found, you just walked past all these bodies and you saw a bit of movement in one of these bodies. Now you could have just closed your eyes and carried on because you're in the death zone, and and they always say you just got to look, and as he said, you got to look after you. But you saw this movement, and you basically created a world record for yourself for bringing down that Indian doctor. And you saved a life. And he says, well, it's just honesty with yourself, Bernie. And that's an incredible thing. I mean, I could go everywhere with all these kind of things with so many different, but I just thought that's quite a nice one to bring to you.
Honesty with yourself.
Because you kind of look at what I've done. You can't really, if I can use the word, bullshit your way through a military mission, because people die. You can't bullshit your way through a race because you get found out, you lose. And you can make excuses like, I've worked in motorsport, you can blame the setup of the car, you can blame the tyres, but at the end of the day you get found out eventually. The engineers sit there and go, well, actually that's not wrong. I've even been at a Formula 1 race where the driver's come in and said he's got a problem with the car. They've gone around the back and they rattle the spanners in the bag, and they just, we've taken it off, we've changed it for you, off they go. They've done nothing. Incredible, isn't it? Mindset again. But mindset, but also what an incredible team to have the confidence to do that. So it's those kind of things that so mindset. I think if people come to me and you ask about the coaching side, the performance side, whether it's in sport or your business, if you actually get the people around you to understand the way you like to think, and you share that with them and they agree or disagree, but you find some middle ground on that, you create a phenomenal team of excellence. That's my vision on it, really. And you can build all the other building blocks around that.
How do you go about leading those people so that they all have this passion for the common goal to achieve?
Well, I think it's about your integrity, your honesty. I mean, look what's going on in the political world at the moment. You kind of, it's a slippery slope to nowhere, isn't it? And it's kind of, but sometimes with leadership, you can actually, you can have the support mechanism under you that's got good leadership as well, that creates your leadership. So I'm not saying, the people underneath you made you famous. I don't say that. It's like I said, there's a famous Australian guy who I got to meet, David Moffat, and he's been a CEO of Telstra, and he's gone on to, I think he had two jobs, one in the city in London, and he was working he was a CEO of two companies, and one in Hong Kong. And what was interesting about David Moffat, very intense, full. I shared a hotel when we went out to Shanghai to watch Mark Webber race, because he's a fan, and I was working with Mark at the time. And I shared a room with him because, and it's very interesting that he'd get up at 5 a.m. and say, hey, Bernie, try these 9 exercises. And I'm like getting out of bed, spinning on my head. And I think, bloody hell. And I just thought, wow, you're just so, you can call it intense because I'm pretty intense. But he was so driven and motivated about filling his day. But he started his day, like I said, it goes back to making your bed kind of thing. He started his day with a task, and he wanted to achieve that task, so it set him up for the rest of the day, and that's how it started, and that's what. So leadership for me, the man at the top, the woman at the top, whatever, you've just got to have your principles, and the people underneath you is like when things are going wrong, that they look up to you with respect, that they know that you've got that back. I think that's what leadership is, really. That's the key thing, because if you make someone feel good when times are bad, that's a clever skill. And even though you at the top there are kind of toppling yourself, and it's easy to go around and point the finger and pass the buck, I think if you all get to group together and you say, well, I'm top of the tree here, this is going wrong for us. What we are going to do now is how do we make it right? And instead of pointing the finger, which goes on, what department, right, you? And if that department has made it wrong, then there should be a support mechanism there to bring them through. Because that's how it works in my world.
Definitely.
If someone's gone wrong and someone's got injured in a military sort of situation, you cocked up. It's just, that's what's happened. Let's deal with it. Let's not just blame people. Let's get on and deal with it.
So many of us, in business, in life, that when we try challenges, we're not realistic about what it's going to take to achieve success.
And also you may realise, this is where the leadership comes in, that the person or the persons that you've given a task, that they've realised it's a bit beyond them, but you might be a kind of leader in your world, that you're unapproachable, that they see it foul before they getting to this point where it breaks down, and I blame you. Inadvertently at the top of the tree, I blame you at the top of the tree because you didn't. They were too frightened to approach, and that's what you got to look at. You got to look at. My background is I'm quite a very kind, caring person, but I don't do grey. I'm afraid I do the black and I do the white, and I'll have you all worked out very, very quickly because that's one skill I have got. But what I will do is I guarantee you that if you're struggling on something, I will throw a team of people you to make sure you lift up and you're floating like the rest of the team. Yeah. That's probably the best thing I can give you because I've seen that happen, and I've seen guys on special forces course that I thought, my God, he's really in a dark place, and sometimes it's a small nugget that can lift them, and they actually have gone on to become incredible. I'll give you an interesting story. I was on my parachute course, and the SAS and we used to do the same parachute course together, and I bumped into these two Scottish lads, both Scots guys, just past the SAS, and one of them was just having a few beers, giggling, laughing, jokes. I thought, and I said to his mate, I said, this guy, I said, he's incredible. He's just a personality. He's always got the wit, humour. He says, Bernie, you never know where he come from. I said, his parents were alcoholic druggies. He used to turn up at school with no shoes on sometimes. He ran away from home, went into a home, he joined the Scots Guards, and he went on to become a very, very senior officer in the SAS. So you talk about resilience, drive, passion, go get. If you've got a little bit of that and you've got a team behind you, look what you can create. That's how I look at things.
So, finally, our number one podcast guest for 2022. His name is Justin Hedges, OBE. Justin is the founding partner and executive chairman of Prevail Partners, an intelligence, strategy, advisory and risk management company. He is also one of the youngest Royal Marines ever and retired from the Royal Marines and Specialist Military Units in 2018. He was awarded his OBE for outstanding leadership in operations and has worked in top roles within the UK's national security architecture. So with the Evolve to Succeed podcast being primarily focused on topics such as leadership, resilience, personal growth and entrepreneurism, Justin seemed the perfect guest, and it's been proven by your response to this episode. We were not wrong in selecting Justin as a guest. Did your leadership style change during the course of your career? Because obviously, leadership training within the forces is renowned. But at some point, do you develop your own style? Because I'd imagine as you come out of that training and you're a newly appointed officer, that's kind of one way of doing it. And there's a little bit of freedom, but you're kind of doing it the way you're taught. Did your leadership style change as a result of your time?
It certainly evolved. I think it's fair to say that all of the training and education and leadership that's done within the military gives each individual the set of tools. But for each and every one of us, you apply those slightly differently. I mean, I think one of my strengths, and I will have had many weaknesses, but one of my strengths is I formed, I think, quite a successful communication method, which was sort of a contrived thing, but I used to love sitting down with the guys and girls in a very informal way and just talking with them, whether that was away on operations or in the unit. I'd spend at least 50% of my time really just talking to people. Oh, what are you doing? What are you working on? Most of the time, I was actually wanting to know what they were sort of producing for me. So they were sort of like, right, what are you working on? How's it going? This, that, and the other. But in almost all occasions, that would then just evolve and me giving a little bit of an explanation about what the priorities were as far as I saw it, what the politics were, what was going on in the international stage in the Middle East, or whatever it might be. But that I think for me became my most successful means of keeping the team that I was responsible for moving in the one direction, and my method of inspiring them to do their jobs.
you always look to the military as a great example of, where great leadership does take place. So is there anything you've witnessed during your time within the Royal Marines where you think that was incredible, leadership?
I think the first thing I'm going to say to that is the reverse.
Okay.
And that is poor leadership, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course it is.
Because there's one thing that I saw on several occasions, and sometimes from some quite senior officers, and that this was avoiding taking responsibility when something hasn't gone well.
Okay.
And in military operations, or and the military in general, not everything goes well all of the time. And I think one of the most unseemly or worst aspects of leadership I've seen is when senior people take a really big step back into the shadows and allow blame to roll down to the junior level, when actually the best leadership I've seen is when people, although many factors might have been involved, have really stepped forward, put their hand up and said, actually, the buck stops with me.
I'm the leader.
I'm the leader. I'm responsible. And, face your charge, place the responsibility at my door, and protecting junior people that, to be frank, hadn't got out of bed that morning thinking I'm going to make a mistake or wanting to make a mistake.
Nobody does, do they?
But stuff happens. Yeah. And yes, there might have been factors around poor planning or whatever, but at the end of the day, I think one of the most important characteristics of a good leader is the willingness to take responsibility when you are the one that's responsible.
Now, seeing kind of the commercial world in its kind of reality, do you believe that military approach to managing people, leadership, what does transcend really well into the world of business? And what could our listeners that run businesses perhaps learn and implement from the military world?
I think there's a common service that's offered from ex-military people to the private sector, which I think is right, and that is just rigorous planning. I mean, what the military does do, because it has hundreds of people employed on a day-to-day basis, is good planning. There are tried and tested tools that have been developed ever since the British Army was formed by Cromwell, and before, the legacy of doing that. And I think we are asked to and provide that sort of support. There are lots of other entities out there run by really good military people that what they do is help commercial companies of varying sizes to conduct that sort of planning and bring that in. So I think that's one thing that definitely comes across and is sort of needed in the private sector.
But the counter to that, do you think, if you're, maybe not in your instance, but maybe in others coming out of the military, probably think and overthink and plan, especially in the early days of a business where sometimes you've just got to be entrepreneurial, you've got to see the opportunity and you've got to take the first step?
I think if it asked me, well, what can the military learn from the commercial side, I would say risk-taking.
Yeah.
Because I think what you've put your finger on is where, people that succeed in business, use their business instincts better and are more willing to take calculated risks on less planning than, say, a military person would do.
Yeah. 4 years post the military career, being in the commercial world, if you could go back to the day you left the military and say to yourself, there's one thing you're going to need to learn, there's one thing that's going to need to change, what would that be, Justin?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think the area I'm struggling with more today than I did in my latter years in the military is delegation. I mean, I think I had got to, certainly in my mind, a pretty good place of delegating and trusting the people around me in the military, but there was a huge infrastructure of training and education and layers of checks and balances that meant that actually when you just gave a bit of direction, effective delegation, you would be it would be sort of followed through. I think what I've found in the business world, and although the company has evolved to have a little bit of size to it now, every decision feels like you own it from soup to nuts, and therefore balancing delegation with supervision and trying to not drift into micromanagement is an area that I'm really struggling with at the moment.
Looking back now, the best piece of advice that you've ever received, Justin?
I think two pieces of advice that I've received that I would sort of pass on. First of all, get back up on your feet, dust yourself down and go again. I think Churchill once said that success is not final, failure is not fatal. It's the courage to continue that counts. And then the second one, which I think is universal, be good to people and for they will be good to you.
Yeah, both are great, but I love that final one. If there's an adage to live your life by. So that's it. We wrap up 2022. There are our top 10 episodes. I really hope you've enjoyed the podcast in 2022. We really appreciate all your support. Please do keep listening. We've got some great and fantastic guests lined up for 2023. Thank you.